Hello.
Hi guys. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, Savannah, from the Optimum Horse. I'm really excited to have you here. So we're going to be talking about lifetime soundness today, and this is kind of Savannah's thing. So she's going to tell us a little bit more about it. If you guys are joining us live, let us know where you're joining us from, what you're up to, and I want to know from you, is lifetime soundness possible? Let me know. So Savannah, before we jump into the chat and start having a chat, I want to ask you a little question. So we're asking this of all of our lecturers, all of the people who join us on Facebook Lives, because of the Vet Rehab Summit. Our Vet Rehab Summit theme this year is research meets reality. And this is really exciting because I feel like this is kind of one of our biggest struggles is we don't have enough research, and when it's there, is it really applicable to what we're doing, and how do we really use the results in practice? So they need to come together for us. So Savannah, my question to you is, what is the research article that you quote most often, or what is the research that's made the biggest impact on your practice or your way of thinking?
Great, sure, thanks. I love that, research reality. So honestly, it was, I don't remember when it was probably about 9-10 years ago. I started, as I was realizing the patterns that were in horses, and I was finding them in younger and younger horses, ones that hadn't been ridden or trained or anything. I was like, what is going on? So I started looking into like the birth phenomenon and what research had been done about, foals and birth, et cetera. And I found really very, very little. But the one thing that I found was the detection of rib trauma in foals, in newborn foals. And it's a critical care unit. So it's basically, that was Jean et al. 2007. So yeah, I guess it would have been, about that long ago. So about when it came out, or just shortly after it came out. And so what I realized was it confirmed for me that, the patterns they found in birth trauma were the same patterns I was finding in the horse. And then I looked further and kept digging, and I keep looking, and I'm like, there's still not a lot of research on, the birth phenomenon in horses. And so this has led me to hopefully spearhead a lot of this. I mean, that's part of what my bigger goal is with all this work that I'm doing, is to actually start producing more research and producing teams to do that. The other piece is really just more of what Carolyn Dyson did, not too long ago, and really detecting 80% or more of horses have undetected and undiagnosed pain and asymmetry. And that was what I had found in my own practice, in 20 years. And so that really, those two things really like solidified for me, just speaking from a place of like, it is in like almost every horse, and it is something that's completely missed. And so those are the two things that really stuck out for me and supported me in, finding my voice with the horses for the work that I do.
I love that. I love those two papers because, like you say, Dyson's work has really been incredible in highlighting just how common asymmetry and unsoundness is, and essentially in horses that are believed to be sound and are in work and the riders think are okay. That's the biggest eye-opener. And we did a research refresh on that paper, detecting rib trauma in newborn foals, which was so interesting. So if you guys want to learn more about that paper, head into the members portal, the Equine members portal, neonatal physiotherapy, and go listen to that research refresh. Was one of my favorites. So let's jump, with that was a great introduction to our topic. So I see we have some people live with us. Hi, everyone. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We have Savannah Jackson here with us today, and we are going to be talking about lifetime soundness. So Savannah, do you want to just introduce yourself to our listeners and what it is you're doing?
Sure. So I call myself an optimum performance equine technician, and that is a self-coined title. But I found that really what the work that I'm doing doesn't really fit into any other category. And that was like one of the number one questions that I always get, like for 20 years, is what are you? What do you call yourself? I'm like, all right, I'll satisfy it, right? So, but it really is about performance, but it's also about finding where it starts and how we can make it like a permanent improvement. And so that's the work that I've developed and been practicing for 20 years. And then prior to that, been a rider. I used to ride show jumpers and work for some really top trainers, international trainers and riders. And what I found was, as I think as physios, I mean, I'm not an actual physio, but in the work, the body work and the work that we do, I think, and as riders, we find that there's patterns in their bodies. And I started noticing the patterns of pain and asymmetry in the horses' bodies that I worked on was also the same as what I felt when I rode them. And so this led me down these paths, over many, many years to finding like, well, where does this start? Is it right-handed people? Is it the South Hemisphere horses spin one way and the North Hemisphere spin the other way? It was this whole, like all these little veins of, where is this coming from? And eventually, as I started working on younger and younger horses, down to like foals, I was like, okay, these patterns are in the babies. And it was really like mind-blowing to me, like a real eye-opener. I'm like, okay, wait a second. And so basically, as I did more research and like I said, found that there wasn't really anything done, the work that I have found is I've actually trademarked the term birth physiology and also lifetime soundness because they go hand in hand. The origin of horses' asymmetries is the birth process. And the patterns that I have found with that are very, very consistent. In fact, to the point of if someone sees see your own baby being born, foal being born, and you can see which foot comes out first, I can tell you where that horse's pelvis is. And that's something we are familiar with as, horse people, but it's either been, I find it's been tolerated or we think it's just something to manage, not something to permanently change. And the work that I do, it's like the courses that I'm teaching now are really 3 pillars of study. The first one being the birth physiology. The second one being what I call postural restoration. And that's the system or method that I use. It combines different modalities. So that restores and releases their spasms and their birth physiology to be a posturally symmetrical horse. And that's in through riding. And that's something I had to prove to myself over 10 years with, different clients. And not seeing horses for a long time and coming back to them and they're still basically the same as where we left them, even after injuries, et cetera. So, and then the last piece is biotensegrity, which is kind of a fun new buzzword that some people are hearing about, human and otherwise. But it refers to, it's directly related to that lifetime soundness, all 3 of these pieces. And biotensegrity it's really the inherent integrity and tension and compression of the entire system. And that's, tensegrity itself, but then bio is according to the human or the living being. And that is something that I've also talked about for many, many years, but didn't have a word for, because when the pelvis is out of whack, then, it throws all the tension systems off. And I've said this for a long time, like their locking mechanism in their stifle, for example, or the way that they use their whole body or be able to release their neck. They can't do that when everything is all wonky, right? So by restoring their posture to a symmetry, then you actually engage that phenomenon of biotensegrity. And that creates 2 really big things. It creates a structure, the horse structure, stronger than the sum of its parts. And it also creates that thing that we see in horses, that perfect grace, that perfect dynamic beauty, right? And that's what really, grabs us, I think, mostly as horse people, like really at the core. That's what we're here for. We're just like, oh, we love horses, but it's that thing that moves you, that emotional thing that you can't really put your finger on. But that's what captures and has, through the eons, right? That's why we're here with horses, like forever and ever. So those 2 things are really important. But the last little piece of that is, as riders, and even just working with a horse at liberty or, on the ground, when we are at one with the horse, that is the pot of gold that we're all really wanting, right? And how many of us can say that in the zone ride or that in the zone moment with our horse happens every day? Mostly it's like a few and far between, and we're just still chasing it, we're like, call the chiropractor, call this, call that, get to the, just to get back to that place. And it's an honorable piece, but it's like, we're kind of looking in all the wrong places. So that's what this work combines, is those three pillars, and the end result being really lifetime soundness for the horse, but also for us, as riders and as horse health professionals, really just wanting the best for the horse, and having that connection and that partnership that we may have lost completely. So
yeah, wow, you've touched on a few really great things. I want to just say hi to everyone who's with us. So if you guys are watching from the Equine Vet Rehabbers group, I can't see who you are. I can only see that you're here and saying hi. So if you want me to speak directly to you, please do type in your name after your question or your comment, and then I'll be able to see who you are. But otherwise, we will just answer your questions or your comments. At any point, pop your questions in. I want to know from you guys, is lifetime soundness possible? Is it possible to restore horses to 100% symmetry when they're not born symmetrical? Let me know what you think. What are your thoughts and feelings about it? So I think we're just going to kind of pick out the things that you've spoken about now individually, because really each of them is really powerful on their own.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was a really good summary you've just given. But like, what's highlighted to me through what you've said is that we're all speaking about the same things. We're just using different terminology to say it. And so that's always like the first hurdle to get past is like, are we saying the same things, or are we actually speaking about completely different things? And I really love that about having conversations with vet rehabbers, because we're all from different backgrounds and we all have something to add to that puzzle, right? So like, even though I'm aware of the birth trauma that occurs, I've never thought about it in to the degree that you have. So let's start with that. Let's start with what you call birth physiology. Just explain a little bit more to us. Like, firstly, what are the traumas, right, that these foals are going through the birth process? What did they find, for example, in that paper? And then how is that impacting the horse as they grow? And is that where their unsoundness, not unsoundness, asymmetry is coming from? Their sidedness, their preference for a rein, etc. So let's chat a little bit about that.
No problem. Sounds good. So, so birth trauma is when, when the baby is coming out of the birth canal in the mother, and it has to shift its shoulders and the sternum and the rib cage, the largest part, to get out of the mother. And so the baby starts in the womb upside down as in partitions coming out, and then it basically rotates and twists and turns to come out the birth canal, toes first and then nose next. And in order to get out of that birth canal, they have to shift their body. And so what happens and I've actually asked prominent vets like Rude and Riddle, et cetera, that deal with dystocia and like actual like abnormal births, like what's the percentage like that they see, and how much is that really detected? And they said, we see maybe 3 to 10%, but she said it was probably like more like 30%, because even that gets undetected. And I think what happens in that paper, what the paper talks about, is the right rib cage, behind and underneath the shoulder blade on the right side, is usually what gets fractured, bruised. I mean, there's very obviously variations of it, right? I think even that gets undetected. I mean, some foals can die, and then when they fracture ribs, I don't know what, they must notice that there's something wrong, right? But even that is undetected, or not detected often enough. And so I think horses can go through their whole lives having, a rib cage that was maybe slightly fractured or stressed or strained, and it's just never really even looked at. So the other part of that is, so birth trauma is one thing. That is a smaller percentage, I think, of like the entire picture. What I'm referring to is actual birth physiology, which is just a normal birth, Every horse has it, when it goes perfectly and everything's great and you got this cute little baby running around, you can see the pattern setting up within like the first week of being weight bearing. And so what I see is, again, 90% or more of, and I'm noticing it varies a little bit by breed. So thoroughbred quarter horses, most of those breeds are what I call left hipped. And that's when they come out the birth canal, the right foot is the first foot to present, right front foot, and then the left front, and then the nose. So essentially that entire right side of the body is shifted forward. But the other piece of it, that because the baby starts upside down, there's a rotational twist, and it holds the left hip back, and the right side goes forward. But then there's also a twist in, like if you picture a horse's spine, here's the hind end. It's a twist down into the right. So the left hip is back and high, the right pelvis tuber ischiae is forward and low, and then the entire sternum and right rib cage is pulled forward and down in a twist from the spine. And then the shoulders dropped on the right. And usually with their right neck is tighter as they start to develop and, just get weight bearing. So that's essentially what I call a left hipped birth physiology. And before we go further, you pointed something really important that one of my goals with this work is actually to create a universal language of speaking about asymmetry and pain detection in horses. Like, there's the facial expressions and all those things, but I think we need something a lot more specific and like hands-on palpation. And so I actually have created an app. It's I'm just beta testing it now, but basically a scale of pain in the horse from 0 to 10, it's technically 10, but I say 10 doesn't really exist because they're usually gone at that point. So let's say 9. So it's 0 to 9. 10 is, you're not really going to see that very often, but 0 to 9, and there's descriptions for each one, and it's based on a few different things. So I have that in development, and I'm teaching that to the students that come through my course, and also just the universal language of birth physiology and asymmetry that go hand in hand. So that is a big hope of mine. Obviously I'm open to input and like we create it together, but to create a universal language that we can all use that can describe the same things, right? So that's essentially what I find to be birth physiology. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So, if you guys are not used to like thinking about the horse being born, because who sits and thinks about the horse being born? You might not. Then there's this really cool video that Savannah showed me, and I've shared the link for you guys in the comments so that you can go and watch that afterwards, because it shows you how it happens, and with what Savannah's described now, with how the horse goes from upside down, twists through the spine, through the pelvis, etc. You'll be able to then see that nicely. So go watch that if you want to get a better visualization.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. And like you say, it is essentially what we see in adult horses. So is the way that they are born literally setting them up for life? And can we intervene really quickly and change that pattern and not have them grow up like that? So we wrote a really cool blog about why your foal should see a vet rehab in the first weeks of life. And I'm going to share that with you guys again, but like share that with your clients, because if we can change this pattern in those first weeks, then we grow, then a symmetrical horse grows up, and we don't have the hooves changing shape and adapting. We don't have the problems of sidedness potentially at all, I don't know, but at the very least not as strongly during that schooling and backing process. And then we have a sound horse, right, for its entire life, right?
I'll just, there's actually, do you mind if I just give you some feedback from a client that I just worked with last week?
Go for it.
Okay, and this is just like to give you an example, and I hear these comments every day, but this is a woman who's a very prominent trainer, rider, lifetime horsewoman, owns a supplement company. Like she's very, very, esteemed horsewoman. And I worked with her and a few of her horses, and she gets horses that aren't really a rehab, but they're like, they're jumpers or dressage horses that have been broken. And they're like, they send them to her to get them right again. Right. Mm-hmm. And she just said, I worked on her horse the second time, and she got to ride him afterwards. And she was literally speechless. She just said, this horse is a completely different animal. There's no more sidedness. He doesn't lean left anymore. And it was just a really incredible, it's just a validation, but I get these every day, but it really is possible. That's what I want to impart, is this is something that I've been doing. And, it seems like 20 years, I just had to do it myself and prove it to myself, and just see it over time. Right. And really put it all together. And that's what I'm presenting now. And that's what I'm bringing out into the world, but also to invite everybody in to learn it, because it's powerful work and it's really, really rewarding. And it's so satisfying to see these horses like literally happy in their bodies, sometimes for the first time in their lives. Their whole being changes. So it's just, it's moving.
Really, yeah, very interesting. So I want to hear from you. I want to hear your thoughts. What are you thinking? What are your experiences? Please share them with us. Savannah and I are here to talk to you, not to each other. So come on, chime in. Let's hear what you have to say. So Savannah, let's chat about symmetry, okay?
Yeah.
We're not unfamiliar with symmetry. We are dealing with levels of asymmetry from just like a left-handed horse all the way through to an unsoundness or whatever it may be. We're dealing with levels of symmetry or asymmetry all the time. So I want to let's talk about, is it actually possible for a horse to be symmetrical, and why, and how do we get them there, and what does that look like? Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. You wanted me to talk about that? Okay, so again, when somebody brings me a horse and they're like, okay, like for example, I worked on one of my students' horses yesterday, and he's a big warm blood and has he's really damaged his right hind, like stifle, hamstring. So he's going through rehab for that, but she's learning this. She's a massage therapist, and she's learning this process because she was just unsatisfied with the level of results that she was getting in the horses. She does a great job. She can get them kind of symmetrical, but then they go back. And that's pretty much the same story that I hear from most of the people that are coming into my course. So we start by opening him up, and I watch him walk, and I look at his feet. I look at the way he travels. I look at his shoulder level, his hip level. There's different markers that I'm looking at to determine what I try to determine his birth physiology first, because that's going to dictate how then I approach working with his body and releasing it. So the next step, is basically I've determined he's a left-hipped horse, but some horses can get switched, there's layers of it, right? There's the birth physiology, but then there's also what happens throughout their lives, injuries, falls, riders, saddles, all the other stuff, right? The external. And so I work through his body, and I find the places in the spasms in his body, and I'm using myofascial work, I'm using bioenergetic work, I'm using acupressure, I'm using, that's pretty much it. There's also two other pieces, though, that are really important, and I think you mentioned this earlier, was nutrition, and then their emotional balance. And so I'm also looking at where the source of their stress is. It's going to come from one of those three, places, where it's like structural, nutritional, emotional. And it always starts with one, and then it can cascade into the others. But if you don't address the primary source of stress, then their bodies stay in a sympathetic dominant state, which is a fight, fright, flight. I've added freeze and fidget. So those are the 5 F's of stress, right? And then there's also, how do they process the stress? And I've created a scale of what I call hyper anxious to stoic. So you can have a horse that deals with, processes their stress and gets super hypersensitive, hyper anxious. And then you can have the other one where they go shut down. And you can have the same horse that can go between the two, but mostly they have one way that they tend to go. So those are other things that I'm evaluating, is where their primary source of stress is, because I'm checking nutritional points, I am finding out about their food, finding about their history. You can have a horse that is born asymmetrical, but then, and doesn't, like, let's say a wild horse, okay? And I've worked on lots of Mustangs. And so it's like, that isn't necessarily a problem. And if everything's perfect, why, besides getting out the birth canal easily, why are they asymmetrical? Well, maybe it's because they can run faster in one direction, like push harder off of one leg. But essentially there's no stress on that structure. And so maybe then they encounter, a hard time with food. So then nutrition becomes the stress. And so that can be the primary source that then creates, like when they're in that sympathetic dominant state, look at all the physiology associated with it. It's, the nutrition, digestion shuts down, which I believe is one of the main number one reasons why you have so many ulcers, is because of this asymmetry and this undetected stress on the body. And then, then they aren't digesting their food properly, et cetera. So I look at all these things and, and then I'll get a sense of like, did they come from an abuse case? Did they come from like a really hard, training program where they started too early? Did they have an early injury? Did they have like trauma where the mom died, and they so emotionally, is there something there? So I find all that history out and start to put the puzzle pieces together. And I'm looking also at their feet, the different sizes. If there's a high-low, it's almost always the right front foot is almost wider and lower, and then the left is upright. If they pop the splint, it's almost always on the right front medial. Left hind typically has, overuse injuries, hocks, etc. So I'm looking at all these patterns and putting it together and then going through the horse's body and starting to release it systematically. It is all soft tissue. And by the end, and that's the nice thing about this work is you can actually check your work. Like there's no more spasms. And you can actually feel the symmetry in their body and you can see it. So that's really the process of what I use. And I call the whole system, symmetry physiology. That's like the Optimum Horse is what we're looking for. And then symmetry physiology refers to all those pieces being in, a parasympathetic, harmonious place for that horse to be at its optimum.
I like it. I love that you're including nutrition. You're looking at the different sources of stress for horses. Like we know how important it is to look at the horse holistically, to look at all aspects, and how often is their environment a stressor in their lives, and like continual source of stress, and their management. And so like we really do need to address those things when we're looking at a patient that it's a problem for. So yeah, challenges, right? Changing the world, really.
A lot.
Okay, so let's chat about biotensegrity. So this is exciting. And I mean, for a lot of us, we're kind of getting into biotensegrity. It's the same thing, essentially, right? From the angle of the fascial lines and fascial connections. And because at the end of the day, that's what's connecting the body, right? And causing these links from front to back and top to bottom and inside and outside and all over the place. And we've had some amazing lectures with Tulia Luamala on our Equine platform about the fascia that have been absolutely mind-blowing. So chat to us a little bit about biotensegrity and how you're using that and what it's doing for you. And guys, again, I want to invite you guys, if you have any questions for Savannah, now's the time to ask them while she's live with us. So pop them in the comments. We really do want to hear from you. Okay, let's chat biotensegrity.
Yeah, so biotensegrity, I mean, honestly, I don't have a ton to say about it other than it's the end result and it's also what we're trying to achieve, even though it's relatively, I mean, I think it was really first only talked about, at least as far as in the life form, only a few years ago. But it's really the perfect structure, like the structure being in a place of perfect tension and compression within itself. And that's where the integrity comes in. Because the integrity is like like if you think of a wheel, like a bicycle wheel with spokes, if you have one of those off, it throws the whole wheel off out of true. And that's what essentially happens with a horse. If you have one little thing, like the pelvis, and for me, everything happens from the back to the front, so pelvis to head, and then top down. So, you know, obviously there are things in the feet that are going to create the same way back up, like a feedback loop. But for me, initially, because of that birth physiology, everything happens first as a load-bearing mechanic, and then it actually then will come back because it takes longer for that hoof to change based on what's happening, right? But so yeah, the biotensegrity of the whole structure, it's really dealing with all the ligaments, all the tendons, all the muscles, all the fascia, all the bones, and also being in a perfect, let's say, you know, health. So that's where also nutrition comes in, and proper riding. So if you have a muscle that's in spasm, you aren't getting full range of that muscle. You know, you don't get full extension or compression. You know, like it can't relax fully, and it can't be used fully, maybe even at all. And so that all starts to throw the whole system off, and horses really have to compensate, and, you know, bless their hearts, you know, like they do so much sometimes with so little. You know, they really have very few choices and options that they've been given, and they're like, well, okay, we'll figure it out. Or they get, you know, the other way, they go really rank, or, you know, you look at their options. It's like they can either shut down, they can get mean, you know, they can just kind of spook, or just throw in like what I call a gentlemanly, or, you know, like a kind message, like, this isn't working for me, I'm going to have to change it, you know. But they are always communicating with us. So as far as back to biotensegrity, you know, it's really, like I said, we're trying to get full release and full range of all the muscles. And, you know, that's where the nutrition piece also comes in, because if you're not feeding muscles correctly, you end up, you know, like, just imagine like in a 24-hour period, if you have sore muscles, and even if they're in constant spasm to hold an asymmetry from going worse, then you aren't recovering in a 24-hour period, even if you're getting all the best food. So then you're creating stress, you know, you're putting a load on the joints, tendons, and ligaments where they don't necessarily have to be. So this whole, you know, sort of downward spiral, so to speak, of where it comes from, you know, the writing has been on the wall for a very long time, and you can find it before it gets to that point. And even once it does get to that point, you want to correct why they injured themselves, because here's another research paper, is like, you know, 70% or more of horses that go into rehab re-injure themselves. You know, so that's really like all that whole train, you know, there's all these different avenues. Those can be prevented, those can be stopped, and they can be corrected. You know, like I've worked with horses that have kissing spine that have not had to have surgery, and they're back in full work, and they did great. You know, so it's a postural issue, I think, first. So it's really, you know, it's all intertwined, right? And that's really my goal, is to find, you know, give people the tools to find it, detect it early, and correct it early, and then also, yeah, you have a team of people. You want to work with the vets. You want to work with, you know, the physios, the farriers, the dentists, like making sure all the other balance pieces are in place, right? I mean, you can't do it alone, but it's very, very, you know, it's just really, yeah.
I really love this, and that's where lifetime soundness comes in, right? Because if we can pick those muscles that are overused, areas that are in spasm, underused, postural, postural asymmetries or incorrect postures, and we can correct them from day one, from before they start working. It means that they work correctly from the beginning, and then they stay sound. Because what most injuries are as a result of incorrect use, overuse, trauma as a result of incorrect use, right? That continual micro trauma that's happening over time, as opposed to like a sudden traumatic event. It's almost never a sudden traumatic event when it comes into our hands, right? Because they're really good at like getting themselves caught in fences and things like that.
All the stuff.
Given that, but that's really, really exciting. And I mean, if you guys work with young horses, either foals or horses that are like in the backing process, is that something that you're commonly doing? I would love to know. Do you have clients who use you during those times? because those are really important times to be working with the horse's body and making sure that they're getting as symmetrical as possible through that process. So I love it. I love it. That's one of my favorite areas, is like working with horses that are in the backing process, because there's just so many things that come up during that time, and I love it. They're really amazing. That's great.
Yeah,
so guys,
really glad. Can I say something about that? I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of the things about undetected pain and asymmetry in a horse is, as young horses, they're going to pretty much be like, yeah, I can't do that. It may be a pain response. And one of the things that I have to tell you, one of my peeves lately has been driving me crazy, but obviously just showing us the gap, is when, like, let's say on a training site or something, they're asking for training help. And it's like, yeah, my horse has been checked. There's no pain. I'm like, yeah. Are you sure? Like, given this statistic, like, we just don't have a good way to measure it. And like putting the power back into the hands of owners, this is a very simple system, even just to learn, how to detect the pain and asymmetry and the birth physiology. Like, just that in itself, I don't diagnose anything, but that's a diagnostic tool, right? You can really like sort of see where the loading patterns are and see where the problems can be. But you can use it as a daily check system, like before you get on your horse. Like, is there pain here? Are they going to blow up when I get on them because I step into the saddle and it hurts their, you know what I'm saying? Like, but especially in the young horse, because I find when they are feeling fine in their bodies, you encounter a lot less resistance and a lot less fight back or push back, and the whole training process goes much faster. And even in working, like schooled ridden horses, like that process gets shortened. Like, they develop and they improve and they learn so much faster when their bodies are just functioning correctly, instead of like taking forever to get into one, through one training process.
Yeah, I mean, they're some honest creatures. They actually really like working with us when we work with them well, right? So when there's resistance, when there's pushback, there's a reason. There's always a reason. And so it's really working with the trainer to find, like, when are they resisting? What are they doing? What are their patterns? Because for some horses, they'll get rushy. For some, they will slow down and stop and just kind of freeze for a while. And there's a reason. So what is going on? And we have someone who's commented here and says, yes, they encourage all their clients to at least have their horses assessed before starting under saddle or in harness. And that's great. I really like that. And are your clients doing that? Are they working with you before they start, and do they work with you then after? Or is that just kind of advice that you give them that they don't really listen to? And then Caroline says, how do you check for pain before riding?
Yeah,
do you want to go into that?
Yeah, great questions. I mean, it's something that's more of a visual. You got to kind of see it. And I have, there's some, in my course portal where you can see like the different courses that are there, and my symmetry physiology masterclass, that's a much bigger, like, you learn how to fix it also, but there is a course coming that is just the identification of pain and asymmetry. But you can basically do a hands-on palpation, and it's a technique that I teach, and I show people how to check their pelvis, but it's basically upper body pain, so looking at their neck, their withers, their back, their lumbar, and finding out where they hurt. And for example, like a wonderful horsewoman I worked with yesterday, I showed her horse's pelvis, and she was just like, oh my God, because it wasn't straight. And she was just like, holy cow, and it's just that moment, like that connection that you have when you can do that with your own horses is really, really powerful. And the other thing that's worth mentioning is I find when I'm working on a horse that has had all the other stuff, and then, it's just, and it's still not right. And I work on a horse and I just do the evaluation process just to see where it's at. That horse takes this, it's like, okay, finally somebody sees what's going on and they understand. And there's a healing in that. And that's, attunement, right? Or we just acknowledgement of, we get it. We know what's going on. And now there's a correction for it. So those two things are very, very impactful as, just as learning how to, just a basic pain evaluation with the horse. The other thing too that I think is worth mentioning is if, when you learn that, and again, this goes back to that universal standard and that, systematic way of measuring and checking for it, you can check, other people's work. You can actually check if there's been progress made. Like, for example, it doesn't mean that they're doing wrong, but let's say after you get a horse's hocks injected or something, and you go back to check to see if it's helping the upper body. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, so those are just ways that you can actually, again, taking the power back in your own hands as owners and riders and trainers, whatever, and just checking your own horses and just connecting with them in that way at a deeper level. So I know that was kind of a vague answer, but it's as far as how do you check for pain? But yeah, it's a more systematic answer.
The beginning of it is that we need to just start looking at our horses, right? As owners, and I mean, I'm a physio, and still I struggle to look at my own horses and be objective and to see them for who they are and not through the glasses that I put on, right? Because they're perfect, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, look for things like, are they standing camped under? Are they... what is their posture doing? Where is their back sitting? How are they holding their head? Just recognizing how they're standing, posturally, is already the beginning of that. And then the other one that I find really easy to learn and really easy to apply is if you go and look up the Masterson method, just looking at the ladder meridian. So easy, and it's so empowering for you as an owner and for the horse, because they, like you said, they kind of feel you're listening finally, and it will give you a good baseline of just where your horse is. So I think that those are really good places to start for you to just look at and start to connect with and feel where your horse is at.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'll be doing is kind of in the next phase of putting together some really good educational tools is I will be putting together a short series of videos of me actually working on a horse, so you can see what it looks like. And then also a challenge for people to get in and challenge themselves to do that exactly, is learn to look and interpret. The visual assessment, very important, which is what you just pointed to, but also, and these are all parts of my current course, but, visually assessing them, watching them moving at the walk. And I usually pick up everything from the walk. I don't need to see them trot. You know what I'm saying? I can just bing. But teaching people how to, what they're looking for, and listening to the footfalls or watching the hip swing and watching the rib cage swing, things like that, very concrete, specific things that I look for, and giving people those tools to assess their own horses. So visually and hands-on. So those are coming. The best way to find out about that is just either being in my group or, being on the group page or the product page. But
let me share with you guys quickly the link to Savannah.
There's a couple more questions that came up. Did you see those?
I see them.
Okay, I just want to make sure. I know you're in control of time.
Okay, so Michael Davis says, I have a 19-year-old gelding who recently was diagnosed with extensive arthritis in his right hock. He has been out of regular work for months and has come in dead lame on the right a few times. Last chiropractor visit was early Feb, and he was out all over. Is it possible to get him back into light work?
Again, you have to see, but I've worked with many horses that have been diagnosed with arthritis, in their neck and, in their hocks and their other joints, and actually getting them back to a really, really happy, good working place. It's all going to be dependent, but again, looking at why did they develop arthritis in the right hock? So I mentioned the birth physiology for a left-hipped horse. The opposite also occurs, the right-hipped horses. So the right hip high and back, the left hip low. And then they have the diagonal bias is from the right hind to the left front instead of the left hind to the right front. So that could be, this horse is a right-hipped horse. So he created that stress in his body. So taking that out of the equation takes the load off of where he's created arthritis or other injuries. So that would be the very, very first step. But I do think it's possible. I've just seen, really miracles happen. I'm like, I don't know. We'll just have to see. It's up to the horse. And I've seen really great things that, didn't seem possible.
Okay, good. I agree. I mean, it's probably possible. It'll take time, and you need to keep working. And it's like peeling off the layers of an onion, right? If you start with the birth physiology, and then like your chiro says he was out all over, like that's just the process of over years the body changing and compensating for probably the birth physiology. So it's really interesting, and good luck with that. I think if you're keen, check out Savannah's course and jump in there and see if you guys can help your horse through that. I think that's a really good idea.
I also do now, since COVID and everything, I have created like online consultations. So, that's not like all the answers, but that's one possibility too. A lot of people start with that, and then they'll, find out more about what their horses are going through, and at least get a protocol of like how to, then find what the right course is. One of the other really nice things about the work that I've developed is it's a permanent change. So this work, actually, they do not go back to the way they were. And that's one of the biggest things that people are like, have their hard time wrapping their head around. They're like, why is it permanent? And it actually is. And again, this is one of the things I had to prove to myself. It's a permanent and cumulative improvement in the horse. So when I first do one session on a horse, the first session, that's the worst they will ever be. They will never go back to the way they were before that. Even if they fall and crash or whatever. And generally, by the way, accidents tend to happen a lot less, because here we go back to biotensegrity, when their body is in that perfect harmony with itself, they can get themselves out of the way. They don't create as much damage. Mostly when horses fall, it's because of their asymmetries, or a big part of it because of their asymmetries. And they actually then reinforce those asymmetries. Yeah. They'll fall on the right side and they'll damage the right shoulder, whatever, right? So those are two big pieces. But horses that I work with, like even the worst case scenarios, like I've had horses that, people tried to diagnose neurology and, like EPM, and none of those things applied, but yet you could not even touch the horse. Like this is a racehorse mare that I worked with. And within one session, like she was rearing, bucking, wobbling around, weaving in a line, just walking in a straight line down the aisleway. And within 7 sessions, she's back to work, back in training. So, over roughly that many months, so there's a lot of really powerful things that come out of this work. And like I said, I'm teaching it, but it's really about just sharing, getting other people to learn how to do it. There's too many horses that need the help, So yeah, it is a process, and it can be faster than it doesn't have to take forever, is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't have to take forever.
So Caroline says, how do you differentiate between a true pain response and a response from work-related muscular tightness?
Great question. Most of the time I find horses don't have a lot of localized training pain, unless it's on top of asymmetry pain. So, for example, working on a really nice reining stud, he's in full work. He's got really tight lumbar, really tight in his right pole, right base of his neck, left hip, left glute. After one session, those spasms are gone. And so then putting him back to work, they're probably not going to show back up again. I haven't found like those you would have to do some really, really hard work to get that horse to be physically in pain. Like when we go to the gym, if like first training program, like, the first time you go back to the gym, right, you're going to be like, oh, okay. But after a certain period of time, you're not really sore anymore, right? It just becomes a building process. So the horse is the same thing. And so I think there generally isn't that much pain. And the only other time I will say that there might be pain that comes back is when I see a client, if I meet them at the shows and I'm familiar with that horse, they might have like a little bit more glute pain. but it's so slight compared to the pain of asymmetry first. Yeah.
Caroline, that was a great question. Guys, if there are any more questions, let us know. Michelle, I'm sorry, I think I called you Michael. We have a Michael that regularly joins us, so my eyes just saw that. But yeah, guys, thank you so much. I have a few resources that I just kind of pulled together for this chat and that I'm going to share with you guys in the comments as we finish here. But essentially, I've given you the link to Savannah's course. Definitely go look at that, especially if you are an owner and you actually want to, get a better feel for what you're doing and help your horses. Or if you're a professional and you want to get to know what Savannah's doing and get that lifetime soundness, results that last, right? Changes that actually are permanent. I think that's a huge drawing card for a lot of us. So go check that out. And then there are some great webinars and things in our members portal. I'm going to share those with you in the comments. But yes, I'm going to leave you guys with this thought. Block your diaries for the 13th of November. That's Vet Rehab Summit. You want to be live with us, so book it in your diaries if you haven't yet. It's going to be amazing. We're talking research meets reality. Savannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.